Okay, so this is a Panasonic Lumix GX1. This is my very first mirrorless camera. And today I'm gonna show you how you can turn a beginner's camera like this one into very professional looking footage. So it's not just about this camera. Actually, this one I'm pretty sure they don't even make anymore, but it's about any entry level camera that you're using right now and you're trying to maximize the potential of. In this video, I'm gonna show you all my tricks. So let's go.
Click, 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 swish. I'm a videographer and I'm on the verse. So when I shoot my shot, I don't miss. I'm gonna take the shot, take the shot, take the shot.
Okay, a couple things before we start. First of all, the AC is out in my office at the moment, so I apologize in advance if by the end of this video I've got sweat patches and a shiny forehead. That's about 1,000,000 degrees in here, so it is what it is. But the second thing is that my Artlist subscription giveaway is still ongoing. It ends on November 22nd. So if you want to win a 1-year Artlist subscription, make sure you watch one of my prior videos, which is probably appearing on your screen right now. All the details will be in that video, so make sure you make the most of it. I'll link it up now, but I'll also put it up at the end of the video as well so that you guys don't miss out on this video. So speaking of, without further ado, let's get into it. So my first tip to get great professional looking footage out of an entry-level camera, or any camera for that matter, is to shoot from a low perspective. Because when we're watching sport, whether it's on TV or even in real life, we're always watching from a high perspective. Like all the cameras are higher up so they get a great view of the pitch or the field or the court, whatever the sport is. Some will be at ground level, of course, but it's usually more for replays. And even as a fan, you're always in the stand, so therefore you're looking down on the action. So this is a view that we're very used to. There's nothing special about it. But when you're filming from a low angle, now all of a sudden you're giving us a perspective that we rarely get, and that is quite interesting. It's different, it catches our attention. And I think there's also a link with that perspective from a kid that's looking at the entire world from a low perspective, and everything is new and big and impressive. And I think that there is a connection there where it sort of brings you back to that, that time when you were a kid and you're looking at the world from that way. So yeah, this is just me sort of rambling, but I do think there's a connection in there somewhere. Another thing that makes your footage look really professional and cinematic is shallow depth of field. That's when your subject is in focus and everything else in front and behind is blurry and out of focus. You achieve that by having a very low f-stop. That f2.8, f4, f10, 22, whatever, that's your f-stop. So the lower that number is, the more shallow your depth of field will be. So the problem is that when filming outdoor sports, obviously there's a lot of light coming in, so your image will be way overexposed. And for a lot of amateur videographers, the first thing they'll do is they'll crank up the f-stop because that makes the image darker. And that way they resolve their brightness issues, but then they've got an f22 f-stop, which means that the depth of field is very wide, so everything's in focus and they lose all these nice blurry backgrounds. So one of the ways to keep your image quite dark while still having your f-stop as low as you can is to use ND filters. As you can see, ND filter is basically like sunglasses for your lens. This is without. This is with the ND. So yeah, it allows you to make your image quite dark while still keeping these blurry backgrounds. So if you're filming outdoors during the day, ND filters are definitely a must. Another thing that makes your footage look very professional is sharpness in your image, especially around your subject. So obviously, a very expensive lens will achieve that, but if you can't afford one, another way to do this is by using the over-cranking technique, which I've mentioned in several videos before, but I can't explain it better than my man, Peter Sorellis.
So over-cranking is when you use a faster shutter speed than what you typically should be using to create less motion blur in your image. And I like doing this because I find that sometimes when I'm filming basketball videos, it's a little bit too blurry if I use the shutter speed that I'm supposed to be using because the players are just moving around so quickly. So by over cranking, I get a clearer image where the players have sharper edges around them. It's not as blurry. You can really make out what's happening. I'll over crank when I'm shooting 120 frames per second from 1/250 all the way up to like 1/400, just so you can really make out the movement of all the players. And if I was ever shooting in 4K 24, which I don't usually shoot, I usually shoot my basketball videos in slow motion, but say I was gonna shoot 24 frames per second, I would probably over crank from 1/50 all the way up to like 1/250. Because I'm not really concerned with how realistic the motion blur looks. I just want to make sure that the player in the video is as clear as possible for if I want to stabilize, do effects, and I just think it's a cooler look.
Another thing that makes footage look professional is diffusion. Diffusion is basically a way to diffuse the light that's coming in on your subject mostly. So first, there's many ways to go about it. One of them is a bit like the NDs. It's a mist filter, which can be like NDs can have a mist version and a non-mist version, or you can simply have a pro mist filter, which I have one on my camera right now. So if I take it off, right, so there you go. You can probably see that the image is a bit, well, actually the best way to, sorry, I'm looking at the screen. The best way to notice the difference in diffusion is if you look at the lamp behind me and watch what happens when I put this back on. It's a bit more diffuse, it's softer, it's more pleasant to the eye. So yeah, diffusion. You might think that the difference is very subtle, but I personally quite like it in a stadium environment where the lights, especially at night when you've got the stadium lights on, they're very harsh. So it diffuses them a bit and it helps a lot in my opinion. And also it acts as well as a protection for your lens, especially if you're like me, you're not afraid to get into the action. You can have people bumping into your lens. So having something to protect it is always good. Ooh. Another way to create diffusion is to use something like this, which is very cheap. I bought this thing on Amazon and it's this, but it also, there's different layers. There's about 5 different layers. It can be a reflector, it can be black so that it absorbs light. This layer is like a white sort of see-through type material. So when especially if you're filming outdoors, it's a great way to diffuse sunlight, which can be very harsh. And it acts almost as an ND if you want for the sun. So yeah, I've used it many times when filming interviews. So if you're filming interviews on the sidelines, for example, or if you're just doing like a documentary and you want a great soft look while filming outdoors, I definitely recommend having something like this to diffuse the sunlight. Another thing that separates professional cameras from entry-level cameras is dynamic range. In a nutshell, dynamic range is the ability to deal with different levels of brightness within your image and still give you a great result. So with a professional camera, you can have very, bright highlights and very dark shadows and still sort of make it work. Where with an entry-level camera, they struggle to do that. So the way to go around that, if you got an entry-level camera, and I'll be honest, it's not gonna be perfect. It's not gonna be as great as if you had a professional one, but a way to go around that is to not film in standard mode like most people do. Most people film with their entry-level camera and they just use the footage straight out of camera. What I recommend is to film with a much neutral looking picture profile, and then in post-production, use color correction to bring back some of that color, some of that contrast. So basically what you want to do in camera before you start filming is going into your picture profiles, and if there's one that's more neutral, that's called neutral literally, or looks more neutral than the others, definitely pick that one. And if you can play with the settings, you basically want things like saturation, contrast, and details to be lower, so that way everything is a lot more plain looking. It's gonna look very grayish, very plain, very boring, but then in post-production, you can bring that color back, bring that contrast back, but do it at a level that works for you instead of letting the camera make all the decisions, because usually if you've got a cheap camera, those decisions are rarely the good ones. All right, so I hope this was all very helpful to you. Don't forget to click on the video on your screen right now if you want a chance at winning a 1-year subscription to Artlist. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and as usual, I hope I earned the privilege of your time.